Dr. Renee Reeder, and we're going to be covering instrument-driven scleral contact lens fitting. Dr. Reeder is another one with some letters behind her name that make it a little difficult to remember. OD, FAAO, FBCLA, FSLS. What am I missing?
FIACLE.
Yeah, there we go.
And a diplomate.
And a diplomate. So, welcome, Dr. Reeder.
Okay, I just have to find it on here. Hello. So I'm probably the old person on the schedule today. Been teaching specialty contact lenses. This is year 25. So, have seen Sclerals from the beginning and worked through, and just really pleased with how things are improving, because we have lots of different ways to evaluate the ocular surface now that we didn't have before. And it's gotten, talk about chair time, it's improved chair time, it's improved our success, it's improved patient success as we've gotten more and more technology and better technology. So we've come a long way. Most of y'all have never seen one of these. So this thing is on a stick. It's the Placido discs on a stick. I had not seen one until I got to ICO 24 years ago, and that's all we had. And I'm like, I've always had a topographer. And it was like, okay, you had to take a picture with a Polaroid camera, and then you had to measure it and multiply out to figure out where to start on base curve. Thankfully, by my second year there, we had a topographer. So that took that Placido-based image and added videography to it and the computer to it, so we could actually see a little bit more. But we still could only really look at the center few millimeters. And so we had two cone sizes as well. We had the small cone. Those of you that have seen a MedMod, small cone. But my patient population at ICO, mostly African American and some pretty big guys, and you try to get these things in there and you couldn't. And I can't do it either. Those folks with like really deep set eyes, it's like torture trying to get that in there. It's like, oh, and it's rubbing on your superior orbital rim, and you're like, okay, this is evil. So the larger cones were way easier to work with. So the next time we bought a large cone, because we could get it worked on everybody, but it wasn't quite as accurate. But at least we could get some information. So we had, large cones, small cones, all different types of brands. And that was good, but it still was only out to maybe 10 millimeters, right? We don't have any 10 millimeter sclerals around here unless you happen to have an 8 millimeter cornea, which I have done that before. But that's the exception, right? So then we got this LED array thing. And it's wild looking, and it projects all these like little red stars all over the cornea to try to extrapolate the data that way. So, but then we finally got better. We got tomography, right? We combined with the OCT. We did elevation with the orb scan. We had shine fluid technology with our pentacam, and we actually could start to figure out what was going across almost the whole cornea, out to about 12 millimeters with some extrapolation. So we're getting there. We're getting more and more data, but we still know nothing about the sclera. And obviously with sclerals, we need to know what's happening on the sclera. And so it was really I think we were learning more about the sagittal height, and that really and truly is what drives all fitting, right? You've been talking about myopia management and orthokeratology, and we smush the sag height, right? We lower the sag height of the cornea when we do orthokeratology. And when we do sclerals, we vault the sagittal depth of the cornea. It's all the same concept, just going in different ways, but we had no way to measure it. So thankfully, we got our shine fluke images. We could extrapolate some things. And so fine. And now we have multiple shine flukes, right? We have our Visionics, our Galilea, and we have our Pentacam, and more finally coming out, getting us at different price points too. We're all not here trying to buy a $60,000 Pentacam anymore. We can actually start to combine this technology with other things so that we can actually get some images on patients. So we finally figured out what is going on the cornea. We're really good at that now, but we still don't know a lot about the sclera. Okay, so then comes profilometry. And profilometry finally gets us out there, but the early devices, we still were kind of pushing at 16, 18 millimeters. And the newest stuff, we're pushing 22. So we're really getting further out there and able to design. And we have three main instruments, and I am blessed to have all three. So we have the S-MAP, the eaglet, and then there's the Pentacam corneoscleral profiler. It's good to walk into a brand new school, and the first day you're there, they have a faculty meeting, and the dean says, we have $750,000 left in our budget with our grant. I spent 150 of it. So, so I bought toys. So it's kind of a dream clinic and dream research opportunities. So we have all three, and they all have really great potential. I personally, in my clinic, am using the eaglet. In my lab, I'm using the S-MAP. I'm really sticking right now with my Pentacam for imaging because I love my HR. Haven't gone into the CSP just yet, but have them all. And they give me a little different information, but all of them tell me what's going on and help me figure out where to get started. So, what we know now that we finally have all this technology, our Visante OCT that you saw the image of earlier was kind of the first thing we had. And we were just modifying this OCT and taking scans, and we realized that the sclera isn't even curvature. It's angles. Who knew? Tangential angles. And that changed how they made our lenses, because they used to be curved, just like in corneal GPs, and now they're actually, the haptics are with angles, because we now know what the average angle is for the sclera because of the technology. So it's been awesome. We do know that every patient's a little different, and every quadrant is a little different for most patients. Most of them, it's similar enough that you can get by with a sphere or a toric, but there are a lot of patients who every single quadrant is different, and you need a quad-specific design. So we know right eyes are different than left, nasal is different than temporal, and all of this impacts how that lens is going to sit on the eye, whether it's going to center, whether they're going to slurp in nasty tears because it's lifting on the edge and now our fun fogging of the lacrimal lens. What it's going to do? Is it going to impinge somewhere? And the only way we've really known what to predict at the now is we have a really great idea when we get that first scan. So we really, as we get further out, we also know that the sclera gets more toric, right? We get out there and we get closer and closer to what? The bigger we get. What do we have anatomically out in the periphery of our sclera and conjunctiva? Muscles, right? We get into those muscle insertions, and everybody's a little different. And some people's conj is super boggy, and some it's not. And some have pinguecula, and some have conjunctival chalasis, and it's all this stuff going on that makes it more challenging the larger we get. So now being able to image it makes that so much easier. So the S-MAP, first one I got to play with, which I believe is what Dr. Tucker has, right? Is an S-MAP. So you take 3 images, you load them up, lots and lots of fluorescein dye, okay? Load them up, you take 3 images, it stitches them together. You can actually make a 3D and spin it around, it's pretty cool, and see what is going on. And looking at this, we realized, look at that, 65% of these eyes were asymmetric, and at least 26% were toric. So here we are. You'll hear one of the numbers quoted is that about 80% of your patient's lenses are probably going to end up with toric haptics. And guess what? It follows really closely with the research, especially as we're dealing with larger lenses and more opportunity to make those adjustments. So looking here again, you see at that roughly at 16 millimeters, you see that difference in the various meridians. So we're 23 at the top, 26 at the bottom, 28 temporal, 26, 27 nasal. So every one of them is a little bit different. We're starting to see that difference. So the profilometry tells us that. We know that before we even get started. It's like, oh, I'm probably going to need a toric haptic. Or, ooh, this one's probably going to need a quad. And now the technology, the software has now just figured that out for us. And so now we have the ability to go in and go first fit. With the S-MAP, it's going to give us our first fit for our for their particular product. And then when we're working with the eaglet, there's about 15 different ones that you can actually design it for. And ooh, spoiler alert, you can even design CRT lenses and put in what the over refractions are and what was left and spit out all your follow-ups too, coming soon to an eaglet near you. Monday morning at the Kentucky College of Optometry. So coming to some pretty cool stuff that we are going to be able to do with these lenses, with these instruments. So again, as I said, we've got to align the sclera. To do that when it centers, because it's aligned, we're going to get better vision, right? If it's sitting way low, you're going to create like a prism effect to the tear lens, and that's going to give weird, funky, off-axis cylinder. That's why early on, everybody's like, well, why do I keep getting 3/4 diopter cylinder at some crazy axis? Well, because your lens is decentered. That's why. Get it to center. Well, how do I do that? Toric haptics. That's how you do that. And the bonus is with the technology is you know what the toricity is. Woohoo! So half the battle is done for you. So it's fantastic. And that reduces the fogging because we're more aligned. And we also know, great study that came out in 2018, I believe it was, end of 2018, beginning of 2019, showing us that patients who had lenses that flexed were more likely to have a lot of scleral toricity. So the flexure is actually more related to the toricity as well. And what we found out too with all this research is the average patient has like 180 microns of scleral toricity. So that's why you see this recommendation to start with 150 microns of difference. So even if you don't have the fancy schmancy technology, that's a great place to start. And then you can compare what you see on the edge of the lens to get you there to the next step. So again, cool images, lots of different technology that we can utilize to get us to that point. Okay, so the eaglet does this Fourier analysis, finite element modeling, and it actually takes these multiple images and different mechanisms and scans all this in and builds a model. So it's based on building this model. And then we have the SMAP, which is based on elevation profiles. And you're going to get out to 22 with 10 micron precision. That's awesome, right? When you think about our steps with our edges, 25 to 30 microns, depending on the product. Okay. And then the SMAP does have this 2-camera assistance to really give us, and you really do see these lines when you're taking the scans of both on the eaglet and the SMAP. It's like, oh, and if you don't get a big pretty stand like that one's not going to work. Before it's like, be prepared to hit the delete button. Don't even process it because it's not going to be a good scan. Here's what the SMAP scan, the CSP scan looks like from Pentacam. And again, you're starting to see not only the cornea, but the sclera. So again, we have all these fun images. We can get the sagittal heights, we can get the toricity of the sclera, and we can really even see the toricity of the limbus now. So a few weeks ago, I ordered my first quadrant-specific limbus. It was pretty awesome. All right. So again, remember the closer we are to the cornea, the less toricity we have. So this eye, you see the toricity was at 2 diopters when we're at 15 millimeters. And when we go out to 20, that same eye has 5 diopters, right? So the further away we get from the limbus, we're more likely to have toricity, okay? So the bigger the lens, the more likely you are to need those toric peripheries. And again, we remember and we know now that this is an angle. It's not a curvature. Okay. And I do believe the landing angle is 34 degrees. The Onefit. So again, as we get further away, we are less and less symmetrical. And we're at the limbus, we tend to be fairly symmetrical. Further away we get, the more asymmetry. Okay. So this was one of my third-year students in contact lens lab. Normal cornea, nothing to write home about. And he had 4.5 diopters of scleral toricity at 16 millimeters. I was like, oh, did not expect that. But you can appreciate, so this was with an SMAP, just how steep his one meridian is compared to the other. So this is going to take a pretty significant amount of toricity on that scleral lens haptic. When you evaluate these, I don't know if you guys have used much of this technology, but it's like looking at the elevation map on a topographer, right? So again, it's based on a best fit sphere. If it's below the sphere, it's going to be blue in the blues. If it's above the sphere, it's going to be in the hot colors in the reds. So again, it's that same up and down that you're thinking of when you think about on an elevation topography when you're talking about profilometry. So we're raising and lowering, right? So below sea level, above sea level, not how curved it is, but how high or how low it is to figure out. Remember, those actually resemble our fluorescein patterns too. So when we have high and low spots, especially on the cornea, we'll see differences in that scleral lens clearance because of the fact that it's higher and lower in other places. Does that make sense? Okay. Remember that we talk about sagitta and elevation maps in microns. We're not talking, and that's why when you get into a lot of your sclerals, especially the newer designs and the larger designs, they talk in microns because it really is all about the height and clearing that cornea and establishing that appropriate amount of vault across the entire lens. So, recap, toricity greater across from the limbus, nasal flatter than the inferior temporal. With the world corneas, as I said, about 180 microns on average difference between the two meridians. However, keratoconic corneas, it can be as high as 500 microns of elevation difference. And again, the eyes are not necessarily the same. All right. And as I mentioned, this was that article I was telling you guys about. They presented this initially at the BCLA. I'm pretty sure it was in 2018 because I think that was the last time they let me out of the country before everything shut down. And we were there to hear Dr. Vincent present. And again, the really interesting finding was the fact that most of the patients that flexed had scleral toricity of 200 microns or higher. So it really boils down to we've got to get that scleral haptic to match what's going on the sclera itself so that it aligns where we want it to, and then the lens isn't going to flex nearly as much, if at all, because they actually found only half diopter. Okay, so no more having to order lenses thicker, which is all we could do in the beginning because we didn't know what was going on the sclera. All right, so better alignment for centration. Better alignment gets less posterior lens tear fogging, no slurpy of nasty tears. All right. Need to align that periphery also to minimize the flexure. So all of these things are going to improve vision as well. All right. So actually capturing the images, as I mentioned before, you load them up with fluorescein. So one of the instruments recommends fluoresce. One of the other instruments recommends actually taking a hyaluronate-based tear, preservative-free tear, and essentially getting it to glow as yellow as you can. Maybe put a couple drops of preservative-free saline in there to get not it to be so it wouldn't be super viscous. And you actually have to coat the entire ocular surface. So it's a lot of yellow. So we usually put at least 2 big drops in before we even try to scan. So we have them look up, and we put a big old drop in, we have them look down, and we put a big old drop in. And basically, if the whole sclera and the whole cornea are not glowing yellow, put more in. Okay, it really has to stay good in yellow because that's the only way you're going to get that projection back off to give you those pretty lines that you saw. Okay, so you have to have a lot of fluorescein. Kind of line them up, douse them big time, and take a look. When you're doing the S-map, you have to have the 3 images, and so sometimes you may find that you have to redrop between images to keep enough in there to get what you're looking for. The other thing is we have to have the eye really wide open, right? We're talking, if we want to get out to 22 millimeters, we got to get the eye open that big. So often you end up using, sometimes it takes 2 people. Somebody gets the upper lid, somebody gets the bottom lid. Maybe the patient holds the bottom lid. I will often use a cotton swab and get the upper lid and then have the patient pull the bottom lid. If I've got students, we tag team. I have one running the punch the button and delete if it's terrible, and I got the lower lid, and the other students got the upper lid, and we get it pried open as wide as we can. Because that one lady was 80. We managed to get about 20 millimeters on her. I was like, yes. Right? Because she was a Sjogren's patient. I'm like, I need a big lens. And she's like, my eyes hurt. Okay. So we had to pry those eyes open to get a really good image. We do not recommend using a speculum. It puts pressure. Plus, our goal with these is to make them feel better and see better, and speculums don't feel good. So if you can avoid that, that would be a good thing. But I have seen that kind of floating around on different sites and different Facebook pages. Oh, what about a speculum? Just say no. Sometimes taping the lid works. I know I have a colleague who recommends just using a Band-Aid and pulling the lid up and down. That's what Crescent does now, is uses a Band-Aid to pull the lid's open. So again, sometimes you got to get creative, because if you can't get the scan, it doesn't do you any good. So that is part of the challenge, and there's definitely a learning curve to that. All right, so this is one of my scans, and you can see we got pretty far out there. I was pretty stoked. Now, this did not happen the first time. This took us several attempts to get this, but you can see how far out we went, and this is what their ODOS printout looks like on the eaglet, and you can appreciate that change. And you can also appreciate that this limbus probably isn't very spherical either. There's a little elevation there on the temporal axis, temporal side of both of these eyes, in addition to that high level of toricity that you see out in the periphery, right? So again, I wouldn't know that, and I wouldn't have expected that. But we have the HVID, we have Ks. This particular instrument is going to give you Ks, which is why it can be used with the CRT. It is going to give you topography as well as the profilometry, and you will be able to see those changes. All right. So when we combine that profilometry with the advanced customization of Cooper Specialty Eye Care Blanchard's Onefit Med and Onefit Med Plus, we are able to accommodate for all those things you just saw. Okay, we can adjust the center, the mid-periphery, the limbus, and the edge, and we can do them independent of each other. And you can now not only do toric and quad-specific edges, but you can also tackle the limbus. So you can really help that patient. If you're like, I just have too much at the limbus, right? Because you get too much clearance at the limbus, and you're like, it's like this big wedge, and, you know, and then you get the prolapse, right? Because it goes slurpy, slurpy, and the conj is like up under there and covering over the edge of the limbus, and you're like, and then it gets like all foggy in that same spot. Now, not only can you adjust the edge, you can bring the limbus down where you need it, and you get a better appearance to that pattern. You can optimize that fitting. And if you've got the scan to start with, you know from the beginning, because it's going to predict for you what you need to do to make those adjustments. So it's pretty awesome. All right, so the Onefit Med is standard 15.6. You can get a 16 as well. And then the standard diameter for the Onefit Med Plus is 17. This gives you a lot more room to land these lenses, to really kind of come down gradually and land out there, especially with the fact that you can bring down the mid-periphery and the edge if you need to for that highly prolate cornea to it out and get that nice smooth that you're looking at, so you don't have so much clearance at the limbus, right? Because we get too much clearance at the limbus, now we have less oxygen to the limbus. Not really the best thing for our stem cells if we just deprive them of oxygen. And so we just are trying to optimize that as best we can, right? So, as I mentioned, more room to land. So the Med Plus is going to give you 40% larger zone to land that lens, right, compared to the Onefit Med. And you still have a pretty good zone, right? 2, 2.1, 2.3, and then that 2.8 with Med Plus. Okay. And as I mentioned, we can adjust all of these zones independent of each other. So I can raise or lower the mid-periphery. I can raise or lower the limbus. I can raise or lower the edge. And I can do that all the way around in a spherical periphery. I can do it in 2 meridians as a toric, or I can go for gold and do all 4, right? Full flexibility. And the only thing you have to remember that's not completely independent is if you adjust your base curve, you're going to also adjust the mid-periphery and the limbus. And that kind of makes sense. If I drop the whole thing down, I drop the whole thing down, right? So, and it's 50% and 25%. So if you reduce the center by 100, you reduce the mid-periphery by 50, and then you reduce the limbus by 25. That is not entirely independent. That's a function of you're reducing the depth of the entire lens. Okay? You can throw an oblate on there, and then you don't mess with the mid-periphery and the limbus, though, if you want to do that. Okay? Lots of options. Front surface torics. Don't need them as much because you're going to center this lens better. But if you went in knowing that this patient was going to have residual astigmatism, right? They have $6 in their refraction and they only got $3 on their cornea. Well, you're going to need a front toric. So, yeah, you can do that. So you can stabilize this limb like awesome. Lock and key, right? Match it up. It's not going to rotate. Well, it is. It's going to rotate to where that axis is on that sclera, but it's going to stay there. Then I got to do is Lars, because it ain't going to go anywhere else, and put your front toric on it and have a really great visual outcome. Obviously, we have toric haptics. That's what we're talking about. Multifocals, right? If I get a really awesome centered lens with a really even tear pattern, how awesome are they going to see in a multifocal? Right? If I get this all lined up and centered, I'm going to have centered multifocal optics. Woohoo! Then I'm going to have, for those of us who have reached the too short of an arm phase, it's really kind of nice. All right? The oblate I mentioned, the quad specifics, we can do a version of a notch called a controlled peripheral recess. Again, if we've locked it in so that it is not rotating away from where expected because it's aligned appropriately, we can tell the system exactly where we want to go around any sort of additional conjunctival irregularities. Okay? And we can do both sides. We can also do quad specific and raise and lower on those sides too. Oops, sorry. Okay. And the med product line comes standard with HydroPeg, which kind of makes sense because most of these people they were using for either have ocular surface disease or compromised corneas and therefore probably have ocular surface disease too, even though that's not what we're fitting them for, right? So the whole idea is to maximize oxygen, right? Use a really high DK lens, keep the lens fairly thin, and optimize that clearance pattern so that it's relatively thin so that we get the most amount of oxygen. Even in a perfect world fitting sclerals, you're looking at a DK over T about 30. Think AccuView 2, ladies and gentlemen. Do any of y'all remember those? A few of you actually might have worn them at one time. But when was the last time you actually fit one? Anyone? No, right? So we don't really know long-term all the answers, right? But we do know that that's kind of where we're going to max out at this point. It's just the math, okay? But we have all these different things that we can do now to try to optimize that, and the technology is going to help us get there that much faster, okay? All right, so let's look at some cases. The best part, seeing it, making it work. So this patient, 44-year-old female, history of keratoconus, presented for a new fit. She was wearing a Onefit med. She'd had this lens for a couple years. It was a 5,000 with 150 on the right, a 5,000 with a 190 on the left, and you notice lots of adjustments to the mid-periphery, the limbus, and we have a toric edge on here, okay? So we'd already gone there. At the time that this lens was fit, the max we could give on the mid-periphery and all of these was 250. I believe it wasn't actually. Actually, I think it was 200. I think I was maxed out because it's been a bit. And it went to 250, and now it's 300. So keep that in mind. So the central and the right, a little bit of excess clearance. The central on the left was the other way around. And we had a little bit of superior limbal touch. So here were her eaglets this time. Interesting, right? So we've got some irregularity at the limbus. We've got some toricity in the sclera. It just looks very different, right? You can see that cone popping out at you down there at the bottom, right? It's a very advanced cone, right? So what we did, we took our scans. We selected the first lens fit option from there. So you evaluate the results, and then it says results on the screen. And the next line down says first lens fit. And we click on this, and we tell it in this situation that we want to use a lens from Blanchard. We want to put this patient into a med. And so you see it says Blanchard Onefit Med, and I ask it to calculate a quad specific. Because I was like, it's red here, green here, blue here, red there, right? I'm going to need more than a toric probably. All right. And she's already wearing a toric and still fogging. So I need to do more. So we take a look here, and it's telling us this is what we want to do. You click on a button that says Direct Connect, Blanchard Tools, and it's going to send you to the website. It's going to pull over the data from the eaglet and literally go in and tell you, this is what I think the patient is going to need. And this is what trial lens you should put on the eye. And you got to put a trial lens on because you got to over-refract so the patient can see, right? We haven't quite eliminated that just yet, right? But oh, how nice it is to only need one, maybe two lenses, because you know we have to clean them and soak them for 3 hours and peroxide before we can neutralize them if we're following the latest standards. So, yeah. And obviously, with coronavirus, we've had to even be more stringent about cleaning our lenses. And they also tell us if our patients have HSV or Hep C and we apply these lenses, we're supposed to throw them away, right? And I have quite a few Hep C patients because I live in Appalachia, all right? And we have a bit of a drug problem in Appalachia. And I have some that I'm sure that are Hep C positive that haven't told me. So, but you don't know, and then you're going to go put it on another patient. So how lovely that we only have to use one or two. And if we do find out, it's very easy to go and pull them from the set and toss them if we need to. Yes? Do you have a minimum recommended time for settling of the lens before you put in your assessment? Okay, so this is actually, this is before you even put the lens on. So we put the diagnostic lens on, and as with any other, your goal is usually about 30 minutes for settling, right? Now, do we always do that? No. My patients drive from 2 hours away. I love to send them, I know it's not a big deal to most of y'all, but to send them to Walmart, or the big deal is to send them to Texas Roadhouse for lunch, because that's like the only thing in Pikeville. It's 2 hours to the Target, ladies and gentlemen. So it's a big deal if you live from very far to get to go to have Texas Roadhouse or the Hobby Lobby or the Ross, because it's a lot further to anything else. So they'll come into town, driven an hour to the big metropolis, all 7,000 people in Pikeville, Kentucky, and I can usually get them to stick around for a little while and come back. So I have done that with a few patients, and that's really fantastic. And you can throw a soft lens on top with the over-refraction you got, send them out, they can see, woohoo, they come back, and you can make differentiations. Honestly, I always do that? No. I do that more now with my little clinic than I did at ICO when I was like crazy busy and I had 7 interns. We would often, I would jokingly say if you have Tech Awesome, they just scan and you do and you kind of cruise and it goes fast. Well, Tech Awesome is me, where I'm at now. And so I don't always have time to do a scan on everybody. All right. And so I'm going to look at it and do what I can to kind of move things along. So it just depends on your setting. You would really like to give it that 30 minutes if you can, but honestly, if you get it on and you look at it and you're like, that's not half bad, right? If you look at it and it's like, it's touching or it's lifting off, get it off. Don't over-refract it. Don't wait 20 minutes. Don't wait 30 minutes. Don't wait 5 minutes. Get it off and make it a significant adjustment. But if it's reasonable, now you're thinking, okay, now I'm going to go play with a little over-refraction. I may come back and check it again after I go scan it, buy myself a little time, let the fluorescing settle, recheck, you know. So that's kind of how I work that sometimes. But especially I have one gentleman, he comes from Hazard, and Hazard is, yes, Hazard, you know, like Dukes of Hazzard, is 45 minutes to an hour away from us. And so when he and his wife come into town, they make a day of it. And I'll see them in the morning and I'll dispense his lens, and they go hit the Ross and the Texas Roadhouse, and they come back after lunch. And then I have 3 to 4 hours of settling. It's awesome. And so that works out really, really well. Does that make sense? So again, what we're going to do is we're going to pull that lens, and this is what it told me to start with. All right. So this person, remember, was in a 5,000 with a 150 oblate. So that meant we were at like 4850, right? Well, it recommended a 47. So that's not too far off from what they're already wearing, 150 microns. So we're already drilling it down. And we designed this with a quad limbus. And you can see we adjusted down. You saw that difference in the limbus based on what we saw with the lenses. And we did do a quad periphery. So the left eye, she was doing good. It had a 190 oblate and had just a little bit of touch, so I changed it to a 150. All right, and I increased what I could increase that I couldn't do before. Right, I was tapped out at 200 when I made this the first lens. So I tapped it out to the 300 that I could get this time because there was so much limbal clearance. It didn't really change much with the peripheral, and this patient is now 44, I believe. She was 42 when we started the process. And so now she's like, my arms are too short, and she's an attorney, so that doesn't work very well. She's an attorney, and she homeschools her kids. I don't know how she does everything she does. By the way, this patient drives 7 hours to see me. She followed me from Chicago. So it's a process. Binocular acuities with these lenses, 2015 at distance and 2025 at near. So we put the multifocal just in the one eye. We did try it in that other eye, but in the end, we found that we couldn't get that perfect centration because she's so irregular that we couldn't get her quite the crispness at distance that she wanted at the dominant eye with the multifocal. But now she's doing everything she wants with her lenses. This is what she looks like. Can you guys appreciate how irregular she is? So this is from superior to inferior over her apices. So she's only got 125 microns at the end of the day clearance. Remember, she drove 7 hours to see me. So she's been on a while. And 470 there at the end. So this is even with that minus 300 on there. We still have over 400 microns at the base of the cone. Okay? So, next, I'm running out of time. You have any questions about her? She's pretty awesome. She sent me a picture from home and was like, it's not red anymore. And she used to put half Optive and half saline in the bowl. She used a straight neutrophil, no fogging, 2015, 16 hours wear. It's like, happy dance.
You've got Justin on the edge of his seat over here.
Happy dance. All right. This is another patient. This is a normal cornea, but a really high myope. Minus 11, minus 1050, fairly flat case. She is all axial, right? And so previous contact lenses, she had this front cylinder in them, and they way over cleared. I'm like, there's like 400 microns of clearance. No wonder it's decentering and you have oversill. All right. So, and she was kept saying, the lenses are drying out. My lenses are drying out. And every time I looked at them, they were just filled with fog. They were not wetting. Okay. They were wetting just fine, but she was slurping in all kinds of stuff. So here are her eaglets, and you can certainly appreciate her toricity as well, right? She's a lot steeper, a lot more elevated, a lot higher in those vertical meridians, right? And her limbus is toric too, right? Who knew? So we went and we did that first lens choice, told us to do a med and a 3950, recommended 100 microns of toricity. We sent it over to the system, and we put the diagnostic lens on there that we ended up putting on there. It was a 4200. I didn't have a 3950. What I had in my fit set that day my students broke one, was the 4200. So that's what we put on. Plus, I also knew I wanted to put an oblate on it because she's minus 11. And I really didn't want her lens to be minus 11, and because she had some near complaints. She's not an optometry student, right? Lots of reading. And lots of digital device. We are a paperless campus. They all are issued a iPad Pro. So talk about digital device use. Lots and lots and lots. And so you can see this was the lens that we ended up designing. We actually put a little more toricity in this periphery. So you can see the adjustments we made from the standard lens in that profile. And so this was actually what we ordered at first, based on her scans and based on the first lens that we put on. Notice we're down to -6 and 6.5. And so she was like, I can read. She was pretty excited because she had actually started resorting to wearing plus over her other lenses. She ended up at 20/20 plus, and 2015 at distance. And you can see she settled at a pretty good place, 211 and 196. I wasn't too worried there, but she was still saying it's drying out, it's drying out. And what we saw was some fog. And we would start to see a little bit, I don't know if you can appreciate it on the screen, but a little bit of debris starting to come in. And here's her clearance. Here's the other eye, really pretty. But here's what we saw. Oh, the circles got moved in the translation back and forth. So the circle should be over there where it's lifting off. All right, and this circle should be over there where it's lifting off. Notice where the marking is, exactly in that meridian. So it was rotated right where we expected it to be rotated. So and this is what happened when we kind of push the lens a little bit. Whoosh goes the fluorescein. So it's lifting. Okay. So what we do, we increase the toricity. There's the fog. You can see the little bit of debris. So it never was actually that it was drying out. It was fogging in the tear film. So we went to the tools and the website, and we adjusted and ordered this lens with a quad periphery. All right. And when everything was said and done, this was the final order. You can see those quad peripheries based on those scans with the oblate. Here's the other eye. Again, quad periphery to accommodate that difference in elevation that we found on the profilometry. And here is the final order with each meridian all the way around. And here was the next lens. The clearance looked great. And here, just to remind you what her periphery looked like. All right. So really, really good. I think I have one more I'll zoom through. So this one is a keratoconus patient wearing one scleral, big cone. All right. Here's his profilometry. Lots of sclerotricity again. First Line Fit is telling us right away that we need plus 250 minus 200 as a place to start based on this sclera. We put that in, we try the lens on. Here's that lens, teeter-tottering. Okay, there's that prism. He had some over-refraction that had SIL in it. We actually decided to go along with most of the customizations, so we didn't quite reduce the mid-periphery as much as it said, plus 200, minus 150. So in the end, this patient, it got us there super fast. This is the gentleman that comes from Hazard, right? He drives an hour to an hour and a half, depending on traffic, to see me. At the end, he's also a sharpshooter. He's 2015. He's very happy when he goes to fire his rifle, right? Because he can see everything he needs to see. The technology got us there so much faster. And it's just getting better and better and better. Reducing your chair time, reducing your reorders, because you have a better place to start. Less time in the office cleaning lenses, because you're using less of them. And again, you're getting that better match to improve the vision, to improve the centration, to reduce the fogging, which also is going to make it more comfortable, right? What did she say she felt? They felt dry. They were dry, but they were, as soon as we fixed all those things for her, the dryness complaints went away. She was comfortable, full day wear. So that match really makes a big difference. And being able to know what to start with gets you there so much